Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Plaster, Executive Editor of Emergency Physicians Monthly.
And there's JD Lannon.
There we go. And this is EP Talk, place where our ER docs come talk about things that are important to us, sometimes professional, sometimes personal. And today, our guest is none other than the inimitable Bill Sullivan, who is my favorite troublemaker. And you're I love it, Bill. I love you, and what you do is we got to have more of you, okay?
Yeah.
And tell me what you're doing now. Tell me what you're doing now.
So I told my wife I was going to be on a podcast with you, and she just looks at me. She goes, "Oh God, don't say anything that's going to get you in trouble." Okay. That's how it's going to be.
That's what I like about you. You are always getting yourself in trouble. Yeah. But you really waded into it this time. Tell me what you're doing.
What I'm doing. Are you talking about my lawsuit?
Yeah. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, that's what I wanted you to what.
So my lawsuit started when the Illinois Medical Board, so the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, sent out a notice last year in November, and it just had a bunch of threats in it. It says it had an issue about masks, where it said that if you haven't examined someone and made a valid diagnosis that would qualify someone for an exemption for a mask, it's a violation of the Medical Practice Act if you write an excuse for someone so they don't have to wear a mask in school. Wow. They also threaten people, providers, anybody that's got a license. They said ivermectin is a non-FDA approved treatment, and there have been reports of toxicity from ivermectin, and anybody that prescribes it could be subject to discipline under the Medical Practice Act. And then it came up with this whole thing about misinformation that said anybody that supplies misinformation about a lethal disease is unethical and unprofessional and potentially dangerous, and they threatened to take board action against anybody that's provided misinformation. So so after I got this notice, someone sent it to me. After I saw the notice, then I sent a Freedom of Information Act request to the Illinois board, and I said, I want to know more information about the basis for all these potential threats in your notice. I said, so what evidence do you have about masks and the conditions that would justify not using masks and the effectiveness of masks in general? And I said, what information do you have about toxicity of ivermectin and the effectiveness of ivermectin? And what are the types of things that you would sanction someone for misinformation, for providing misinformation? Have you done it? And if so, what were the circumstances behind it? And then I said I want the names of anybody who contributed to this notice and anyone who was consulted in responding to this Freedom of Information Act request. So under Illinois law, you've got 5 days to respond. A public agency who receives a Freedom of Information Act request has 5 days to respond, and they can extend that another 5 days if they need to. So after 2 months, they still hadn't responded. So then the law allows you to sue to force them to respond. And so I've paid the $500 and filed a lawsuit against them and said, you've got to respond because we need to know this stuff.
So right now, all you're trying to do is get them to give you the information that was the basis of this letter. They're
exactly. not. And they're still there. I was just in a court hearing yesterday, and they are still withholding the information. Now we're arguing about whether or not I'm entitled to attorney's fees, because part of the statute says if they have willfully failed to respond, that the person who files a complaint is entitled to attorney's fees and even potentially a civil penalty of between $2,500 and $5,000. So now they're arguing whether, before the case has even been resolved, they're arguing whether I should get attorney's fees. So kind of ridiculous, but they're delaying. So now we've got another court hearing that's got set for the middle of October. So now they've delayed effectively for 2.5 more months.
I'm flabbergasted. I'm absolutely flabbergasted. They won't even provide you with not the names of the people. I mean, are they trying any sort of mitigation? Have they called you and said, "Hey, let's
Nothing.
work this
Well,
out"?
no, he said that they're still looking into it, and I keep saying, like, so the attorney general is defending the state's medical, like the IDFPR, and he said, well, we're still looking into it. And I just wrote him back. I said, yeah, 5 days under the law. I'm okay with you taking 10 days. You know what? Take 15. But, you know, we're up to 70, 80 days now. And what have you done? So
Yeah.
that was that was one of the things we addressed at the court hearing. Is the judge said, "What's the issue?" And he goes, "Well, we were able to get the filing in, and he filed that they filed a complaint or a response to my complaint the day before the hearing, so 2 days ago. That just objected to a bunch of stuff that I'd requested, so it wasn't a substantive response." JD, you're looking a little.
I have so many questions.
Yeah, me too.
So, I mean, what do you think is actually going on?
I don't think they have any. They have no basis for all these threats that they're making. That's what I think.
Yeah. You think they're all of a sudden doing their PubMed search and being like, "Oh shoot, this is a little more nuanced than we thought it was"?
Maybe. What I really think happened is back in, I think it was October, the Federation of State Medical Boards came out and said, you know, this could any misinformation or other types of issues. They had a whole list of things could constitute actionable conduct from specific state medical boards. And I think the Illinois boards, there's a lot of other state medical boards they jumped on that bandwagon.
Just knee-jerk reaction and just said, okay, yeah, we'll do the same thing. That
Right.
I'm really curious. Does anybody else? This podcast hopefully will spread the word. But has anybody else in any other state done exactly the same thing that you have done?
I don't know, but I mean, hopefully it encourages other people to do it, because you got to punch back.
Yeah. I mean, well, just come on. It's this. If you've got, we had this discussion. Okay, we had the discussion on masks in EP Monthly. You and Celine presented your evidence. It was civil. I mean, that was not hard. It really wasn't all that hard. And we even discussed ivermectin. Good people can disagree about how you should treat things. Maybe whether toxicity is an issue, maybe a little bit far for the people who are trying to ban it. But I could certainly understand it. But to make that an issue about the board, revoking your license, revoking your board certification.
That's a big deal. And the issue is, I'm not like pro or con masks. Personally, I don't think that the surgical masks that everybody's wearing, I don't think they work. There's no benefit in stopping transmission disease. That's my opinion. But I'm open to scholarly debate about it. And the same thing with ivermectin. I happen to think it works, but I'm open to scholarly debate about whether or not it's of any effect. But to say that we're going to take away a property right, and this is an important thing that people just kind of poo-poo this, but when the Supreme Court has said your medical license is a property right, so it's kind of like your house. Your house is a property right, and the Due Process Clause says you can't take away life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So what they're proposing right now is to take action against your medical license and potentially make you unemployable, because if you've got a black cloud on a black mark on your medical license, you're not going to get hired at a hospital. You're not going to get a license in another state. I had a client that went through this for 2 years. He couldn't find a job. So for them to say we're going to go after your medical license is kind of like saying, if you provide misinformation, we're going to take your house away, or we're going to put a lien on your house. I mean, if the medical board said that, people would blow their minds. But if the medical board says we're going to take action against your license, everybody's like, hey, good, we want to see that happen. To me, it's crazy. And that's kind of what I'm going at, is not to say that docs can provide whatever misinformation they want, however we're going to
Yeah.
define that,
Yeah.
or docs should be free to prescribe anything they want to try to treat COVID. But it's just, we have to have like scholarly discussions about what's effective, what's in misinformation, and we don't fight misinformation, whatever we're going to define as misinformation. We don't fight it by censoring it. We fight it by providing accurate information to overwhelm whatever the misinformation statements are going to be. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. You can't, censorship and all this stuff is just, it's something that shouldn't happen in medicine.
Years ago, there was some cancer treatments. It helped me remember. I'm sure, Bill, you remember that people. It was stuff based on peach pits. Peach pits had a little bit of cyanide in it.
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about.
too.
And they were going to Mexico to get these treatments. Because they weren't available in the United States. And I remember that there was all kinds of debate about that. People were swearing by it. And I'm just trying to take the opposite side to say, if you wanted to, there were people who, I almost got it. There were people who were prescribing that in the United States.
And it's on the tip of my tongue too, and I can't think of it.
Yeah. They were prescribing it in the United States. And the thing of it is it opened the practitioner to malpractice. Because if you give something that the research you could find, the experts would line up to say, this doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work. If the patient decided to say, well, he gave me an ineffective treatment and the research showed that it didn't work, well, then he exposed himself to liability. I don't understand why this isn't the same sort of thing, is to say, well, if you really believe that ivermectin is an ineffective treatment, well, then line up your experts, have the patient sue you if the patient died of COVID after receiving that. And if you can show that there was a cause of, you and I have testified numerous times as experts and attorneys and about this is the whole idea of the malpractice system. Somebody does something for you that doesn't work, you sue them.
They're nipping it in the bud even before malpractice, and they're saying you can't prescribe this. But
right.
If you look, if people want to do more research, and that's a big thing, is everybody looks at Twitter and they said, oh, well, the CDC said this is, come on, y'all, this is horse paste, stop it. If you want to look at the research and not the Twitter feeds, there's a website called C19early.com that's got every study on all the different treatments. And there are only 2 or 3 studies out of more than 80 studies on ivermectin that show it's ineffective. Every other one shows that it has effective in either treating it or decreasing the severity of the course. So the evidence of the effectiveness of ivermectin is pretty overwhelming. And again, I don't want this to become kind of get off in the weeds about should we prescribe ivermectin or not. But the whole idea is we've got to engage in scientific discussions about this. We can't just go based on what some Twitter feed says.
But I guess what I was trying to say is that the malpractice system was set up so that if something untoward happens to somebody, you bring in experts on both sides. And the expert on this side says the reason why that person is injured is because that practitioner did X.
Sure.
And you bring in another, you have a battle of the experts. What I'm saying is we've done this. You bring in experts on the other side and you say, no, that's not really the truth. And I bring out my studies and I show you my study. And I say that that's really not true. And in a jury of your peers, they say it was malpractice. It wasn't malpractice.
Well, I think that in theory that's noble and it's a good idea. But you know as well as I know that once you get to the battle of the experts, nobody cares about the studies. All they care about is which experts and we got a more compelling argument and which one they like more. But juries don't really get bogged down into this study shows this and that study shows that.
But that's the system, though. The system is intended to do that, not the board. That's what I'm trying to. All I'm simply saying is the system was intended to be solved at the individual level and not at the board level.
Yeah.
And every time, somebody, obviously you're reported to malpractice, anytime you lose a malpractice case, it's reported to the data bank, the National Practice Data Bank. If you get a whole bunch of cases against you, then maybe the board will review your practice and do a variety of things and send you back and tell you to, there's a variety of ways that they handle that. This just seems so out of character.
Right, I agree. And this is kind of a pre-malpractice thing, is that the board does have a right to police the practice of medicine.
Sure.
But if you're going to do that, you need to have a scientific basis for it. You can't just call somebody dangerous based on a whim. You have to have evidence before you go and do that. That's part of due process.
Okay, I'm going to put JD on the spot here. I'm going to say, this is a generational thing. I think that younger docs would have embraced this action by the medical board. Yes, no. What do you hear among your colleagues?
So I think that part of this is due to a function of technology, but I don't think that the medical boards historically have had to think about, well, what happens when a doc goes onto Twitter or Facebook and all of a sudden has a couple 100,000 followers and starts pontificating their particular beliefs or feelings on this, right? I mean, Joe Rogan's the perfect example, right? And we're talking about millions of people getting exposed to whoever he happens to decide to put in the pulpit, right? And so I don't think that the board has ever had to deal with that, right? In the history, right? You maybe are worried about somebody who's like on ABC for a night and then they're gone, or the peer-reviewed journals, which 10% of physicians even read, right? So now you've got information that is so easily accessible and completely unreviewed, right? No peer-reviewed journals, that it's like the Wild West of information. And this applies to all sorts of information, I think, today. And so I think it's a reasonable question to say, does our community of physicians have to think now more than before about public trust and this idea of public trust in our community of physicians? And then that's the easy part, because I think most of us would say yes. The hard part is, how do you do that?
Well, that's a very good point. And I actually just made this comment to my wife yesterday, that it's just ironic that 2.5 years ago, when COVID first came out, we were all heroes and we had people out in the, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody's giving applause to doctors and everything. And, we were at the pinnacle of public trust. And now, based on whatever, I don't even know why, but now you read all these comment sections on some of these medical articles, and I don't trust doctors. I'm never going to doctors. All they're just in it for the money. So in 2 years, our trust went from, high to the basement. And we have to do a lot to rehabilitate that. I agree with you.
Yeah. And I think that part of it is, I think some of the blame can maybe be laid at the foot of the CDC, who I think, at least during the pandemic, kind of in many ways sort of represented medicine and science in general. And I'll tell you what, God bless those people. Being a policymaker during this pandemic is probably the worst possible job in the world, because it was a lose-lose for them, right? Because we didn't know anything about COVID. Our early reports out of Italy and everything were somewhat terrifying. And you do some basic math and you're like, what am I talking about? 5 million people are going to die in the next year? How do you not have sort of a knee-jerk aggressive reaction to that when we have really poor data, really poor evidence, and some random epidemiologist who's been sitting in a corner for 10 years all of a sudden is being put in front of a platform of 300 million people saying, well, what's going to happen, doc? How is this going to play out?
I personally, I think that's some of that is an effect of how they approached it. Instead of saying, we don't know a lot, here's the preliminary evidence. Here's, based on this preliminary evidence, here's what we recommend. And then kind of as more and more evidence comes in, incorporating that evidence into the recommendations. It was just like, okay, 1 mask, 2 masks, 2 masks, 1 mask, no mask. I mean, but when they do these things, there's no basis for it. It's just like, next week we're gonna have 3 masks. I mean, come on, you've got to, if you're going to make these changes, have some type of a scientific basis for it. And I think so maybe that's part of it, is that they're changing their recommendations willy-nilly, and they're not really having any medical basis for it. So I think that that's a good insight, that possibly that is part of the reason that there's a lack of trust in the medical profession.
Well, the other aspect of that was the fact that it wasn't just that we don't know this is the best evidence. You know, we do that all the time, right? You go to a patient and you say, I think the chances are 80, 90%, 50% that this is what's going on. This is what I recommend. And in those circumstances, oh boy, we pound on, patient participation, joint decision making, all this stuff about, well, I'm going to tell you what I think is the best evidence, okay? But you're going to have to make a decision for yourself. The policymakers didn't take that position. I mean, you can get up there and preach and pound and say, you got to wear a mask. You got to wear a mask. I believe you got to wear a mask. And here's the evidence that I think that's a safe thing to do. We didn't do that. We said, you don't wear a mask, we're going to arrest you. We're going to do all kinds of, here's my pooch here. You're going to do all kinds of things to punish you, take away your license, And so it resulted in it acted like we knew things that we didn't. And I fully understand and I'm living with JD. That was a tough situation to be in. What do you do? What do you do? And the evidence is it's changing. It's a moving target. But I think that the problem is that when we act like we know something that we don't know, and we take the patient out of the decision, that's dangerous. That's really dangerous.
Yeah. And,
I agree. However, though, I think that if you put yourselves in their shoes, right? I mean, from a public health perspective, like, the masses, right? The least common denominator, if you will, of our society, they don't do well with nuance, typically, right? I mean, nuance is hard, and medicine is hard. And reviewing the literature, I mean, you take a bunch of people who have all been in school for 12 plus years, put them in the room together, give them just 2 articles, right? And they're going to point out the nuances and probably not agree. And now you're asking a population to understand the complexities and the nuances and the unknowns about a disease that's raging across the country. And I think as a policymaker, or even more so as a politician, that's not going to go well for you. And patients and people are going to, well, you're the expert. You're the one with all the letters after your name. You tell me what to do. Yeah.
Well, I'm not even against somebody actually making that decision. It is our learned opinion, okay? This group. It is our learned opinion that you should wear a mask. I just think that the problem became when it became mandated. This is where I jumped in. I got vaccinated. And I got actually got a booster because I was working downtown in the COVID specialty hospital. And now I'm getting harangued about getting, and then I got COVID after that. Okay. And I'm getting harangued to get more boosters. And I've made a personal decision. I mean, that might not be yours, but I've made a personal decision that I think that getting COVID probably has protected me more than getting more boosters. And the boosters may, in fact, be problematic. Based on the research that I've seen. So I've made the decision that I'm going to ignore those calls that I get about every week and a half, they come in to get your booster. But what would happen if somebody simply said, you can't practice anymore unless you have another booster?
And then that's
probably coming.
That's when you get other lawyers.
I think you're right. I think it's coming.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
that way for the flu shot right now. I've gotten letters of like, termination of employment with our hospital system if I don't have my flu shot in a particular amount of time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't work for a hospital like that. Sorry.
Well, I don't think you can work for it. I don't know any hospitals right now that don't mandate
Yeah.
flu shots.
I think that's pretty standard. And I think that they make that decision and they decide to kind of pull that hammer out when they look at loss of work and the productivity loss of people calling out of work through the flu season. They make all these kind of economic, financial statements, and then they say, well, here's the deal. You will find somebody else.
Yeah, except they can't.
Well, now it's probably, yeah, the whole nurse thing has been wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about staffing, and how that's seems to be counterproductive when you really need to have people helping you out, and you're firing 20% of the workforce, and making it worse for everybody else. So,
Bill, I got a
For
question
our next
for you.
EP monthly broadcast, we will now discuss staffing issues.
Bill, do you know? I was looking into this last night. Do you know how somebody gets into a position on a medical board for one of these state boards? I was able to find Virginia's 18 members last night, but I could not for the life of me find out how they got the job.
You can apply for it, but they get appointed by the governor. Well, at least in Illinois, they get appointed by the governor.
Okay. So
based upon what?
I have no idea. I know that there's, like, for example, in Illinois, you have to have, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I know you have to have, there's a certain number of attorneys that have to be on the board. There's a certain number of physicians. You have to have one DO, you have to have one chiropractor, and you have to have 2 or 3 members of the general public. So, and I don't know the exact numbers, but they wanted diversity on the board just to apparently make the decision making so it's not all, people don't feel that it's all stacked, just a bunch of doctors making decisions about other doctors.
Gotcha. Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
because historically, right? I mean, the cases that have been severe where somebody gets their license stripped have been like sexual misconduct or massive inappropriate behaviors.
Right.
Substance use, I imagine, are kind of
that's
historically the situations.
Yeah, that's the standard. And that's part of the reason why I was so upset by this idea of removing your medical license or your board certification, because it was going to, they weren't going to say it was because you wouldn't misinformation. It was going to be under unprofessional conduct.
Right.
Okay, unprofessional conduct is like having sex with your patients, you know? And so if somebody sees that you lost your license for unprofessional conduct, oh my gosh.
Right. You're never going to get a job anywhere else.
You're toast. You're
Never.
unprofessional, you're toast.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're fighting about.
Just so you can figure out what the heck they made their decision based on. Let me tell you now. Okay, you can refuse to answer this question. We're getting to the end of our time here. You can refuse to answer this question, but if you find out that they had no basis, okay, are you gonna sue them? What would be your next step? Let's just put it this way. Theoretically, if you found out that they had no basis, or that they had removed the medical license of individuals, what would be the next step?
Well, I've already posted on my my blog on my my law website what's going on so far, but if there's no basis, then I make another post about that, so that anybody who's accused of unprofessional conduct based upon what's listed in this letter can hopefully does a web search and finds this and says, hey, they've got no basis for us. This is a due process issue. And then I think it hopefully makes the medical board at least reconsider whether they're going to take action against a licensee based on these flimsy accusations. And hopefully it doesn't just stop with Illinois. Hopefully it spreads all over the place to say, hey, here's one case in where a medical board was threatening these things, but they had no basis for making those threats. And hopefully it gives other people ideas to say, if someone comes after my license, because of this. Here's what I'm going to do to try to fight it.
Okay, we're getting down to the last couple of minutes, and I want to, the final question is, if somebody lost their medical license, which has a price tag to it, it's like you say, it's property, and if they lost their medical license due to one of these misinformation, unprofessional conduct charges by the medical board, would it be your opinion that they would have a legal grounds, theory of the case to go after the board for monetary damages?
So I think it depends on the circumstances.
Sure.
I think if the board,
that's a lawyerly answer. It depends.
But I mean, it is. There's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of unprofessional conduct. And I mean, if they're saying we're going to go after you because you say that the vaccines aren't effective and we're going to take your license away, then yeah, absolutely. And there's a case in Oregon already where they've done that. Yeah. So the board's going to get sued, and I hope they lose their pants on it. I shouldn't say going to get sued. The board has already been sued, and I hope they lose a lot of money because of it. Because the grounds for them suspending someone's license, they actually gave an emergency suspension of a doctor's license, and based on allegations of things that happened months and months ago, but they didn't take action until after he spoke at a Trump rally. And then within 2 weeks, bam, his license was gone based on unprofessional conduct. So I hope he takes him to the cleaners. Yeah. But so should there be an action? Absolutely. And the medical boards have to have a basis for their decisions. And then you get into due process issues, both on a state and a federal level. And yeah, there's a lot of good legal grounds for a doctor to sue the state medical board if your license gets suspended based upon some of the allegations that are in this complaint, like prescribing ivermectin or misinformation or masks. So there's definitely ways that the doctors can punch back.
Interesting. Well, if you're watching EP Talk, you got an earful today, and we're happy that you joined us. And Bill, thanks, and JD, thanks for your perspective on all this. So I hope you'll join us in future podcasts. They're going to be coming out a lot more frequently with a lot of different guests. Bill's going to be back. We've got lots to talk about, Bill. And JD's going to be around when he's not working, and he's going to give his perspective, and we hope that all of you will join us on EP Talk in future episodes. So thanks for joining us, and see you next time.